All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Annika Lee, and I'm the Public Affairs Coordinator at the Digital Supercluster, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our second Discovery Workshop focused on digital health and wellness. Before we get started, we respectfully acknowledge that in Canada, we live, work, and learn on the unceded traditional and ancestral land of Indigenous people. As myself and much of the Supercluster team are based in Vancouver, British Columbia, we are gathered here on the traditional ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And we encourage you to take a moment to acknowledge and let us know in the chat the traditional territory that you are joining us from. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be distributed to all registrants afterwards. This is meant to be a collaborative and interactive session. So throughout the session, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to raise your hand or unmute and put any questions into the chat. I will now hand it over to Bill Tam.
Thanks so much, Annika. It's great to see so many familiar faces and names on this conversation. Welcome to our second discovery session. And my name is Bill Tam. I'm one of the co-founders of the Digital Supercluster. I'm joined today by Annika and Ian Evans, who works in our sort of program development area. And so the purpose of today is to really kind of get to a little deeper level than we did in our virtual town hall with respect to the areas that we might want to consider to be focus areas for our next phase of investment. Perhaps where I'll start, just to set some context, is we have a few folks joining us today who maybe didn't have the opportunity to join us on our virtual town hall. So I'm going to spend the first 10 minutes or so just setting some context as to what it is that we're talking about, a little bit of a historical reflection on where we come from and what we've done together. And then I'm going to ask Ian to help with facilitating the workshop portion of this. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is get your viewpoints as to areas that you're most interested in seeing us double down on or increase our focus on as it relates to health. So I'm just going to share screen here for a moment and go through a bit of a presentation. And as Annika said, this is intended to be an open conversation. So if you have some comments throughout this piece, just feel free to put a note or two on the chat. Raise your hand and we'll just kind of facilitate this as best we can. So let me start with this presentation here. Okay, Annika, you can see the screen? Okay, perfect, great. All right, so what we did last time was we sort of set a big overarching goal, was really to gather our community's perspectives and input, feedback towards our strategy for what we're calling phase two. Phase one for us was really a journey that we've been on with many of you for the last 4 years. It's really about the development, adoption, scaling of digital technologies with a few focal areas around being health, sustainability and natural resources, industries, particularly around digital solutions that drive sort of transformation, economic prosperity, and then ultimately the digital skilling area. And, as we went through sort of a recap of our journey, a lot of what we did in the last 4 years together was really prove out that this idea of a collaborative innovation model does actually work, and that combine the expertise of many of the folks that are on this call and many others can help build much more robust and much more innovative R&D products and services as a result of it. And the model, as many of you know, is about demand-based R&D, which in the context of health is something I want to talk about in the workshop portion. But the demand side of the industry is really having customers at the table, understanding what it is that is needed in order to solve for some of the challenges that they have in front of them. It's accelerating the development through co-investment. Again, it's combining expertise from multiple organizations, small, large, academic, and others into the equation. And it's really about driving digital adoption through the customer voice and understanding the parameters of which they're trying to solve for. So, many of you know this sort of collaboration wheelhouse in which we've operated in. We talked a little bit about this in the call, and the areas that we've seen commercial advances. Recall those that were part of our initial sort of strategy work. We were trying to get at data platforms and technology platforms that would actually have cross-sectoral impact. And what we've seen in our investments to date is we have seen commercial advances in some key areas where Canada has some leadership positions. Of course, in the area of artificial intelligence, machine learning, in the areas of quantum computing, genomics, which I think is going to be a mainstay for our conversation today. Cybersecurity, trust, governance has all been part of this idea of data platforms, data ecosystems, and connecting different data sets together. Data visualization, ways to kind of be able to interpret information, especially as it becomes ever more complicated. It's about sensing technologies, Internet of Things, sensors, geospatial, hyperspectral sort of imaging have all played a role. And finally, this idea of decentralization, blockchain technologies, and ways to have sort of verifiable credentials on a whole host of different applications. So we did talk through some examples in health. There are many. I think a good 2/3 of our portfolio of investments in R&D has been in the health area. But ostensibly, these examples, the Autism Sharing Initiative is an example of how we're able to kind of combine data sets and how that could be done in a trusted manner while providing the application base necessary to drive new innovations. The Wellness.ai project is an example of how you can use advancements in artificial intelligence around things like mental health and wellness. And then the telewound care is an example of how you can use artificial intelligence and other sort of algorithms in the context of understanding imaging, providing clinical support systems, and better insights as to the care for patients that have wounds. So maybe I can start now on phase two. So phase two, what we've been talking about is how we can build a hypothesis around the investment areas that would be of interest to our broad community, and also simultaneously tackling some of the big issues that we see in the Canadian context. So we presented this last time and said that this is just a working hypothesis. The two lanes that we're quite assured of is, of course, we've done a lot in health. We continue to see a lot of opportunities in health. So in the second area of health and wellness, that's what we're going to unpack today. And of course, in the talent and capacity areas, digital skills, building capacity among those that are working today in different industries, but also writ large, creating opportunities for future generations. We're going to continue to invest in digital skilling and talent development there. The other areas on natural resources, as I mentioned before, was a big part of what we did on phase one. We're trying to identify very specific themes that we will undertake in this next phase that have the proper intersection between the goals of the sector, but also the digital opportunity and where we need to go as a country in some of our priorities. But let me dig into the digital health and wellness piece a little bit. We did break that down a little bit. Of course, I think for everyone on the call, we all know that digital represents a real opportunity to expand access, especially in this post-COVID era. Access is a big issue. Using digital technologies to improve outcomes, and then ultimately using data and other platforms to really enhance the sustainability of the system, which is really where the main lanes that we kind of identified would be, is how does digital kind of tie into improving access? Well, obviously, everything that's been happening during the pandemic and subsequent to that, and even before that, was about expanding how we define accessing healthcare, which includes everything from virtual to other sort of methods to deliver that primary care and also specialized care. Improving outcomes, I think I highlighted in the project examples a whole host of projects where we've seen the use of everything from AI to other technologies that actually help with the clinical diagnosis, as well as sort of physician support pieces that ultimately can provide for more personalized and hopefully better outcomes for all patients and folks involved. And then sustainability, as I mentioned, some of it is about sharing data, some of it is about how you can scale a system so that there's not as much duplication of effort, but ultimately we know the costs that we are undertaking in the healthcare system in Canada needs to be managed in a way that is commensurate with our capacity as an economy to support it. So with that, I did want to highlight one thing before we dive into the workshop portion, and this is just one snippet to get us started with a thought process. Recently, there was an expert advisory committee that was informing the Public Health Agency of Canada as well as Health Canada on what a pan-Canadian health data strategy might look like. It was a three-part series, and for those that did not see the final report, I can just kind of summarize a few of the elements of that paper. It includes a strategy with recommendations about providing sort of a world-class health data system, even alluding to proposing a Canadian health data charter, something equivalent to something that would manifest common principles that we could enshrine here in Canada. Of course, support for Indigenous data sovereignty, governance is a big aspect of it, trust, policy frameworks, and then ultimately interoperability and ensuring that there's sufficient capacity and literacy across those that would seek to use this capability and platform. So just to get the juices flowing a little bit in terms of what we're talking about, there's one example. And maybe what I can do now is kind of frame the discussion for today. And you know, there's a few areas, and this is just a starting point, so feel free to pose other discussion topics as we go through this. We have about an hour to talk through this, but certainly, you know, the question on the health system is what role can digital play to advance things like the Pan-Canadian health data strategy, but not limited to. You know, there's obviously opportunities in terms of the themes of expanding access, improving outcomes, and what we're really interested in is from the standpoint of the, I'll call it sort of the customer and the industry investment side. So it could be public health agencies, it could be hospitals, it could be regional health authorities, it could also be actors in more private sector interests, but really looking at where their investment priorities might lie and how we might be able to contribute towards those outcomes. So let me take down the screen here and see if anyone has any comments or questions before we dive into Ian's segment here. So Annika, are there any comments or questions in the chat that we should refer to?
Nothing right now.
Okay. All right, well then, hopefully that got us all warmed up. So Ian, maybe I could turn it to you.
Thanks, Bill. So as Bill alluded to, I've got the ominous task of trying to drag out from everyone on the call where your investment, where you see investment opportunities over the next number of years, which is no easy task to do. And as we try and synthesize that down into our own strategy, you know, as Bill articulated, we have our own set of hypotheses around, you know, where we've heard many of you talk about where you'd like to invest and things that, you know, perhaps we haven't invested too heavily in the past. So, you know, one of the aid memoirs for this kind of discussion, I'll just throw up this little slide that I've got here. You know, this is one snapshot, one lens across our digital health and wellness portfolio, and it gives you a sense of kind of our major investments in around the health system, you know, really the growth of home and community-based care and health, which came through strong really in the last couple of cycles for the Digital Supercluster, and the continuing work that we've done in and around public health and life sciences. And we've, I can see from our call, we've got a smattering across all these four areas. And so what I was going to do actually to kind of instigate this conversation was to pick on someone who was a co-conspirator with me in the last cycle with Doug Buchanan. Doug, if you're on the call, I can see your profile picture there. Also to kind of like, we've seen lots of different things come through the supercluster. We've seen many different trends emerge and put their hand up for funding. And it would be great to hear from your perspective what you've been seeing recently, things that are high on the plate in terms of you know, real urgent problems that we need to solve. And then maybe we can jump off from there to explore each of these four domains: the health system, home and community care, life sciences, and public health. So Doug, could you give us your 2 cents?
Yeah, hi, Ian. Hi, Bill. And thanks. And you got me by surprise, but that's fine. Happy to be here and happy to contribute, but primarily here to listen, as I know you and Bill are. So I'd say the things that really kind of jumped off the page at me in this last cycle were the initiatives that had a material, super high value aspect of data sharing and interoperability. That those are the things to me that open up new opportunities for insight and for Canadian enterprise. But those are also some of the most difficult challenges to address. Is how do you get organizations, individuals within organizations even, to overcome the inertia that exists in the system today around data sharing. And I'd just love to see more ideas coming forward in that realm. Of course, you know, as you alluded to, we're seeing lots in genomics, and Bill mentioned genomics. I think that'll be a big and interesting space for Canada. And I guess what we're discovering is a lot of small enterprise in Canada punching above their weight on the global stage in some of these areas that are here on this slide in front of us that have really impressed us, and excited to help them along the way and nudge them along the way with a bit of investment and other guidance. So let me stop there and give it back to you, Ian.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thanks, Doug. So on the data interoperability, data sharing, maybe I can ask Alina from HelpSeeker. Obviously, you're one of our investee companies and have done wonders in trying to break down some of the barriers. Alina, could you tell us some of the opportunities that you see for investment in and around that particular problem set?
Well, I can definitely tell you that it's way harder than folks really think about when you first get into it, because it's something that, especially on the social side, the social determinants is relatively underdeveloped, which is great because it's also where you can do a lot of good, and where the challenge of privacy is really germane for innovation too. So for sure, the work that we're doing with U of T on developing an ontology for social issues and social needs, and the relationship between that and social prescribing, but also taking the concept of health much more out of the medical realm and extending it into population health and even things like public safety or homelessness, rough sleeping, which are global challenges that we know the world is looking for solutions on. That I think gives Canada a bit of an edge up. We might not be able to compete with some of the biotech firms that are much more well-funded, have longer histories, but for sure, we know we don't have an equivalent that's doubling down on the social determinants the way we've seen done in some of the projects in Canada too. Thank you.
Thanks, Alina. So maybe passing that conversation forward a little bit. I see we got Dominic Stoll on the line as well. Dominic, obviously, your groups typically have had access to large amounts of data in the past and will continue to in going into the future. I'm wondering from your end what you see as opportunities for collaborative innovation based on the data that's coming out of organizations such as yours.
Thanks, Ian. Maybe I can speak more as a patient than a PHSA representative. If I look at some of the opportunities, as a patient, where we start tracking all our personal health data and how that there is this lack on how this gets into the patient chart or to the provider to actually look at that data. I think that's where there is, for me as a patient, quite a gap on where we can make sure that all that data can be pulled in. Otherwise, from the health systems perspective, I think this fragmented healthcare system we have in our province, getting all that data easily accessible. That's I think will remain one of the key challenges and opportunity to really make sure that all, be that from the private practice to all the other systems, all the interoperability between the EMRs and trying to get all that data on a common standard and making it accessible for the healthcare system and the research.
Maybe I could perhaps ask, just as a follow-on, PHSA's role in that kind of challenge. How do you see that evolving over time?
I mean, I hope that we, and this is outside, so I'm part of the Office of Virtual Health, and this kind of is part of the digital health strategy office to really look at that strategy. So I hope that we can help move that forward and really make that data accessible and interoperable as an organization, partnering together with the regional health authorities.
Wondering if there's anyone else on the call who's felt the pain of trying to integrate data across multiple data sets, the challenges that they faced, and maybe can articulate some of the challenges that they faced in actually trying to pull that together. I know I'm just trying to scroll through my little list here. I see Handel on the line. Handel, obviously you've worked in and around this problem set for a while on the drug discovery side, and looking at those high value applications. From your end, where do you see the challenges and opportunities going forward?
Well, we didn't really have an issue around the sharing of data amongst different parties. Rather, our main challenge was in we made an assumption, which turns out to be naive, if not erroneous, is that there was existing information and data aplenty in the public domain around, potential compounds that could be drugs against specific targets. And luckily, in our project, we chose to go after, SARS-CoV-2 and the main protease. And at the beginning of the project, down, to about a year later, we were blessed with a massive amount of public data that was contributed by many, many different organizations because of the unique nature of the challenge. But for other diseases, it is difficult to get this public data, and that we're going to have to spend considerable amounts of money in order to generate the types of data that we need in order to train our models. Specifically, we use AI to do drug discovery. So for us, it's really a challenge of digitizing or collecting enough high quality data, because data as collected by pharmaceutical companies is largely not of high quality, because data is seen as this wasteful byproduct of the process of getting to a hit or a lead. So really it requires a very different view of the generation of data. It has to be meticulous, it has to be thoughtful and careful, and from the beginning has to have the stated reason for the generation of the data to be to train models or to derive some insights from them, rather than sort of as a way to generate a chemical compound. So I think it's the generation of that data required to train the models was our largest and most difficult challenge.
Great. I see a couple of hands have gone up. I think, Susanna, were you first?
Yes, thank you, Ian. So now that I'm part of Genome BC, prior I used to be working in translational research, so I know the pain researchers have in terms of data access. And with my new role within Genome BC, I'm implementing their data science strategy. And one of the points is to change the culture in terms of data sharing in BC and beyond. So this is something that definitely is on my radar. And as Bill knows, we're putting together a working group that will create a roadmap for jurisdictional health. And we're hoping to have ways to integrate genomics data, biobanking information, as well as clinical data from the different health authorities. And it's going to be a big undertaking, but we're hoping that within that roadmap, we can at least figure out a few things that we can start doing, starting maybe small and building out from there. And I'm hoping, as Bill is going to be part of it, that we map out a few things that maybe we could work on with the Digital Supercluster and its members.
Thank you, Susanna. Robert, I think you're going to take us to a different place than changing culture.
Well, it is a little bit of culture, but I think it can be technically accomplished as well. So, yeah, I think one of the biggest issues that we all face, well, one, all of the data is kept in silos, and there's no really good consenting mechanisms currently to really give access or have individuals consent for the use of their data in these various applications. And I guess you've probably heard me speak previously about more of a distributed system, but a distributed system can be phased in, and we can start to give people those consenting controls, working from these various data silos. We started to do some work with the DNA Stack group in the autism spectrum disorder sharing initiative, which is a really exciting way to start to federate data sharing, and we're starting to work on federated machine learning systems. So you don't even actually have to distribute the data, but you still need that consenting mechanism. And I think that's not going to go away. And the rules that are coming out of Europe and even Canada starting to look at them. In California, we're seeing how it's affecting places like or companies like Facebook and Google. The privacy is becoming a major issue today, and we're not really addressing it. And I think this is an area that we'd be really excited to collaborate with. And I think it would need a lot of the points that Bill outlined in the presentation will really open up our access to getting data available, not so much putting it away, but making it a democratized system where people are fully control of their data. And then now you're going to encourage them to share the data and to make much more of the data accessible. And those that are most in need of care are usually the ones most eager to share their data and help those that are either suffering along with them or those in the future. So I'm really excited about this initiative that we're getting into this year. So looking forward to the next steps.
Great, thanks, Robert. I think, Kirsten, you had your hand up next. Hi.
Hi, yeah, and I'm not in the health and wellness at all. I have access to health and wellness services, but I came today because I know that this is as you're all describing, really in large part a data challenge, right? And it's not so different than the data challenge we're facing in the financial world with open banking. And just as you were talking about, Robert, with consent management and then what are we doing with that? And then the rise of aggregators that will come inside of digital health and wellness will start to really proliferate as they have in the financial world. And I think it was interesting, Susanna, was it Susanna who said it? There is like two parts to this culture problem, right? So one is, data is difficult, and it is quite a Jenga puzzle to figure out, who's got access to what, and the privacy issues and consent. But as you said, Robert, people are more willing to share their data at different stages of different things, right? So when you're ill and you're really looking for support, you're highly likely to share your data so that anybody out there who might listen or might be able to relate, might be able to support you, right? And so it's not just consent now, but we really have to think about consent along a life cycle of people's health and wellness. The other thing is I've been through some health challenges myself, and the place I got most of my information was, Facebook groups or, internet groups of some sort. Right. And so how do you bring in some of that less structured data into this discussion as well? Just like we're trying to do, again, in the financial world. People want to know what's going on in the market with, currency exchange and housing prices and everything, all, worked into also the information that they have within their banking accounts and investments and stuff. So nothing to really offer as a solution, but I think there is probably lessons to be learned along the way here, that it has to be something that you have a life cycle for and have the ability to get in and out of, and really trying to figure out how to bring in that unstructured and other data, that's where I learned the most about and I got the most help.
Yeah, that's super interesting. The parallels between some of the challenges that are being felt in the world of finance and banking and healthcare is definitely it does beg the question: is there opportunity for collaboration in and around those kinds of activities, and any other that seem to be going down that road as well? I can see the chat is lighting up with various things on my end. But I think that's you guys just chatting to each other, so we'll keep going. In terms of these areas that I've got up on screen here, and obviously we've talked a little bit about the healthcare system, and that obviously a lot of the things that are built there are starting to materialize in and around home and community care as well, and the extension of or the expansion of the geography of care into homes and communities. I'm wondering if there's anyone on the call who can perhaps comment on some of the challenges of working in around home-based care or community-based care, and areas that they feel are really now is the time for investing in some of those solutions. Is there anyone on the call who'd be willing to speak to that? Don't know if that's Kirsten, your hand up again, or it didn't come down.
It is. And again, I'm not in this field, but I've just experienced in-home care for the past 2 years for my father-in-law. I mean, I think the challenges you face as somebody who's trying to find that care are, when you can't find it, right? So, it's pretty inaccessible, and then navigating all of it. So just, there was equipment that showed up, and then unfortunately when he passed, like equipment that had to go back and we didn't even know where it came from, and right, things like that. There's a lot, again, to me, there's a lot around what healthcare, and again, the parallel with finance is that, it's a life cycle, where you are in your life or what's going on in the world impacts, what you need from the system, right? And so I just really think there needs to be more support for folks who are looking for that care and navigating that care, even more so sometimes than the care itself.
Alina, you've got a hand up.
Yeah, just because we literally started with a product that helped people navigate the complexity of social care, and finding out more and more that this kind of false dichotomy between what's formal health system versus what's community-based is really not panning out in the real world of people trying to patch together what they need. So there's something around the connection between the various tools and products that we're developing for that home and community component and that formal health system. And then there's this other part of the health system that's often sometimes it's even more funded than the formal medical system, but it looks like this tiny piece of the pie, but it's actually quite huge. And social care, oh yeah, Kirsten saying it's so confusing. Like, I agree. It's actually even more confusing when you get in the business of trying to understand it. So we're in this process of mapping this world. And just to give you a sense of numbers, in Calgary, there's 900 addictions related services, and there's 55 of these are in the formal health system, right? So it tells you, like, if you're only focusing on the so-called formal, it's not like these other components are not formal. They're nonprofits, charities, they're private sector operators that set up shop, et cetera. And that's, a considerable part. So it's really going to be the integration between these various entities that's going to be the trick. But with that, the privacy comes into play. So the point around data sovereignty and following the individual, well, there's all of these other complications that come from the various funding sources that make the operator inherit certain requirements that they have to pass on to the end user. So whoever can figure all those pieces out as an ecosystem it's going to have a huge head start, because we know we have this problem internationally too. Thanks.
Thanks, Alina. I guess my obvious follow-on question is, you've experienced the hard end of it, and trying to navigate the system, and that hasn't put you off. Like, you continue to find the channels to invest, to build product, to move forward in, and you've done that in collaboration with many partners. In the next kind of 3 to 5 years, is it more of the same, or is it starting to now kind of look around to other opportunities where you would apply what you've learned in other areas?
No, I think there's certain infrastructure pieces that are now in place that make the sorting of the complexity much more manageable, right? So I mentioned the ontology piece. We didn't have that a year ago. We do now. Like, we have a framework for ingesting different data sets and making them generate insights that are meaningful to people that are purchasing those insights. So being able to have that productization process in place across that complexity is one thing that we can build on now. The other piece that we can now build on is this kind of defining the focus on something that gets at the heart of the complexity. So we said, let's double down on focusing in on addictions, just because there's all the social determinants within that. We know there's clinical evidence around brain science that is brand new to the implementation science side of especially of the service providers that we're working with. So there's much more that we can do if we hone in on the, not the heart of the problem, because there's a lot more to it than that, but if we understand the adverse childhood experience generationally, and if we look at the intervention and the system of care we need to build, regardless of who's funding it, and we build in this data infrastructure mechanism to support understanding the 360 of it, then we can take that insight and blow it up into other domains, right? So move from addictions into, let's say homelessness, but of course those are so entwined. So if you can figure out one, you can take that and leverage it for other areas as well.
Really interesting. I see we got a hand up from Sandra.
I'm just going to unmute myself here. Hi, Sandra Staple. I'm with the Heart and Stroke Foundation. So a bit of a different lens from the philanthropic side of things, but just kind of building upon what we're talking about in community and home care. I think this is probably the single biggest trend that we're seeing in healthcare today. Is it was happening already. The pandemic skyrocketed this shift of power and burden of care onto consumers. And so consumers now have less access to care. They have a harder time accessing our kind of traditional healthcare system that was set up 100 years ago. And so they're turning to other ways of accessing their care and navigating care. And I think what we're seeing is this big trend, like the Amazons, the Shoppers, the TELUS in Canada, are really taking advantage of, not necessarily taking advantage, but seeing this opportunity. Simultaneously, our population is aging. Our aging population is less health literate. Newcomers to Canada probably don't necessarily have the same ability to navigate this public system versus this emerging community healthcare system. And so the complexity of the system has just, in my opinion, doubled or tripled. But with that comes opportunity. And so it's just kind of that point that I think that's where, because our old healthcare system is so bogged down and there's so much inertia there's so much happening kind of on the periphery. And if we were to kind of really focus our investments and our opportunity there, I really think that's where things are going to change, and the system's going to get disrupted, and kind of the entrepreneurs of tomorrow are going to see those advantages. So just my opinion.
Thanks for that. And Rob looks like he's going to jump right on that thought as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to I sort of agree with what Sandra was saying, and what others are saying, is our healthcare is really starting to push out the responsibility to the individual, and we can see this as a crisis, or we can see this as an opportunity. And I think if we look at where our healthcare system is now, we look at the stresses we keep piling on to the healthcare professionals. It's just not a sustainable model. We only have so many people that are trained as physicians. We just can't load them up the way we've been loading them up and expect them to continue to work this way. People need to be empowered to take control of their health. And I think it needs to start earlier. And there's a lot that can be done in prevention and earlier detection already that we're just not embracing. And if we can start to remove some of the stresses on our existing healthcare system, in a coordinated fashion, and help people, particularly the elderly, with understanding. Sorry, my dog's being a pain. Then we can, we really start to keep people out of the system, and I think that's an amazing goal to try to achieve, because we don't want our physicians to be, and these experts that are so well trained, to be worrying about prevention where they're not trained. We want to give people that information themselves so they can act on it, and that is going to alleviate the healthcare system. So I agree with everything that was being mentioned by Susan. Is that right?
From Sandra. Yeah.
Sandra,
perhaps I could ask Rob and the rest on the call. Prevention is an area that we typically have really not addressed in the supercluster in a meaningful, organized fashion. It has, COVID not helping in recent cycles, but it's really been around, projects have often orientated themselves towards a particular disease condition and doing something about that, and trying to provide tools and support around that. On the prevention and well-being side, it's been a narrative there that exists in a lot of the projects, but we haven't really targeted something that's in and around let's help people avoid this disease, or avoid this condition, or avoid degeneration into this kind of endpoint. I'm wondering if there are kind of low-hanging fruit that people on the call perhaps would like to articulate, where we should be looking for opportunities in and around solutions that avoid this condition. Like, again, we've had stuff in and around kind of enabling AI to do expert diagnosis on particular conditions, but kind of going even earlier. Other opportunities we should be looking for, and digital tools that people are either building or thinking about building, that would be categorized in that kind of early prevention stage.
Well, this kind of plays into what we've been focusing on for the last several years. And so what we've been working on are methods for earlier detection, using a more of a multi-omics approach, which could include some genetic information as well. But to get in front of diseases, particularly chronic diseases, aren't something you wake up with the day after. It's something you've been working on for many years, and it develops over time. And so many of the mechanisms and changes that go on in our systems can be detected before the disease, as we call it a disease, the symptoms really start to appear, and that's when the physician can get involved. So if we start to engage in those kinds of approaches, we can prevent many major diseases, particularly things like diabetes and cardiovascular disease, which are major killers, and it's probably filling most of our healthcare system. I think 80% of most healthcare before COVID was really chronic disease. So I think there's a real opportunity there. And I think these types of exercises don't need to be within the healthcare system. They could be monitored and collaborated with the healthcare system, but maybe they're more for our working population, our aging population that are not yet in the healthcare system. So I'm pretty excited by what we can do with these technologies, and I think it's really time we start to move them into practice, so that we can really alleviate the stresses we're putting on ourselves. And enabling people and giving them the responsibilities to look after themselves. We've kind of taught everybody they need to rely on our healthcare system. What we should be doing is teaching them how to rely on themselves and the information that they have about themselves.
Thanks for that, Rob. I see, Sarabjit, you've got your hand up on this one.
I do. It's Serbi, don't worry. It's a hard name. No, I agree. And I do believe the education, and I love the early screening component. However, I think even going way earlier. So when we speak about mental illness, for example, having to even speak to individuals within the ecosystem right now, in terms of investment, having to teach them that early intervention education, when it comes to depression, anxiety within students, to prevent those, has been a struggle in itself. if we're going to talk about criminal rates, homelessness, when we get into, and then that can in itself lead to many health difficulties that we're dealing with in society. It's astonishing how we're not looking much earlier at even early literacy. Let's get into the mental health illness spectrum much earlier to prevent many of these physical health disorders.
Interesting. Yeah. I see Rob just popped up Alzheimer's disease as a potential use case worth exploring, and I know there's lots of expertise in and around that particular problem set in Canada. Rob, perhaps just to put a bit of color behind why Alzheimer's over anything else.
Well, I actually just thinking about, well, one, it's one of the very hard to treat or impossible to treat diseases once you've developed Alzheimer's, but there's a lot of evidence coming out that there's many factors that are contributing to the development of Alzheimer's. And so if we start to work on this now, even if we don't entirely prevent all Alzheimer's, we're going to understand the condition that much more so that we can make better treatments of it. Depression and is something that we tend to treat as a social, or a lot of mental illnesses we tend to treat as sort of a social thing. And there must be social aspects to it because of the systems that we work in. A lot of these things are manifested physically, and we can, we're getting to the points where we can measure these physical changes in our bodies as we progress through disease. Alzheimer's is not that different. Things like diabetes and cardiovascular disease really do contribute to the development of Alzheimer's disease. There's even a gut related component to it that's starting to emerge. And so, this is, as we have an aging population, this is probably one of the more frightening of all the conditions that we face. It touches on some of the mental, there's a lot of depression that goes with Alzheimer's as well, and associations with it. So we might be tackling a lot of chronic illness by going after something like Alzheimer's disease.
Thanks for that, Rob. Wondering if there's anyone else on the call working on similar diseases using digital technologies where there's a specific focus, a specific disease set that is the focus, but may have applications in other areas of the other categories. Is there anyone else who could share a thought on this one?
So this is Handel.
Oh, hey, Handel.
Hey. So we're currently we've finished our initial project with the supercluster. We've actually found some very potent and novel oral antivirals for COVID-19 that stack up at this stage quite nicely against Paxlovid. So we're going to take this and develop it, but our focus of the company is to focus on a class of targets known as kinases, which are largely implicated in solid tumors and oncology, but have a broad range of applicability beyond oncology. So we are actively working in that area. There are potential applications in CNS and various other areas. So that is something that we're actively working on, and we'd love to be able to work with partners in pursuing
that. Well, throwing that out as a challenge to the rest on the call, is anyone else working in and around kinases, oncology in general?
So I'm not working in kinases, but I'm working in oncology. So I'm a professor in engineering science at SFU, and as an AI expert and machine learning expert, we built a platform that takes CT images and makes measurements of all the organs in the CT image. So this is very important because right now the CT images are acquired in oncology workflows every 3 months or 6 months, but apart from a visual qualitative assessment, nothing is done with it. But there's a ton of information in those CT images. So you can not only look at the tumor, but you can also look at the individual organs in the body. So that has implications in, you can monitor the effect of treatment, not only on the organ that's affected, but also on the other organs like bystander collateral damage. There are a lot of chemotherapy treatments or treatments for oncology that treat one thing but damage 5 other things. So we can monitor that. So we have a company, Voronoi Health Analytics, that makes this platform, and that would be very interesting and important to put forward.
Great, thanks, Liza. Anyone else working in and around oncology? It hasn't been a subject of discussion yet, but obviously it's a huge thing, globally, that can contribute to the discussion here. No? Okay. Okay. Well, I also just picked up it from Rob's comments earlier, diabetes, and obviously we've done a, talking of chronic diseases that affects lots of people, obviously it has implications and can be tracked through life cycles. Is there anyone on the call that works in diabetes and perhaps sees opportunities for investment in and around that domain? Or any other disease that you care to talk about?
Well,
Sorry.
I don't want to plug molecular use so much, but we work on a number of conditions. The multi-omic approach, that's a blessing and a curse, is that we can cover many diseases. And so diabetes is something we've been working on. We do have some work in various cancers as well. So yeah, really interested in working with any number of people on any number of diseases.
I think, Sandra, were you going to chip in there?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, obviously, I'm with the heart and stroke, so heart disease and stroke. And, being that this platform is really focused on demand-driven innovations, I think there could be like a really awesome role for an organization like Heart and Stroke in establishing kind of these kind of areas of opportunity. So right now we're focused heavily on stroke. In the last 5 years, there's been large changes in clinical practice guidelines across the country. A lot of innovation has been happening, mostly in post-secondary institutions, but I think there's a big opportunity there. There's a lot that's being commercialized out of those changes and out of that research. The other area that's kind of coming up is around heart failure. Congenital heart disease, and the other one that's kind of, we don't talk about a lot, but there's a lot of new evidence coming around cardiac arrest. And so cardiac arrest is basically just your heart stopping, and all the work that's being done around like just CPR, people being trained in CPR. Less than 18% of Canadians are trained in CPR. And it's actually, new evidence is coming out that it's almost 100,000 Canadians a year that are dying of cardiac arrest. And it's sort of like flying under the radar because the data, a lot of the data is actually out of hospital data. And so it doesn't necessarily show up in the trends. And it's also not data that's being, there's certain data that needs to be reported to CAI, and cardiac arrest isn't one of those. And so there's a huge opportunity there. There's a big research project being done pan-Canadian right now where we're collecting out of hospital cardiac arrest data. And I think there's a lot happening right now that's like living in post-secondary institutions where the potential for commercialization is huge. And so there's probably definitely a role for organizations like the Heart and Stroke. There's probably others, Diabetes Canada, philanthropic or not, that just have a really good sense of the demand and where the opportunities are that may not have been at the table in this type of thing in the past.
Yeah, no, it's a great reflection, and certainly in the last couple of cycles we've seen a number of early stage companies coming through CDL or other accelerators who are really trying to move that research, mobilize that research through ventures and through either the hospital, university hospital networks or otherwise to actually have a bit of a system in which to actually move these things forward. I can see we're getting close to the top of the hour, Bill, and I was just thinking I'd hand it back to you.
Sure.
To do closeout.
That would be great. And maybe thank you very much, Ian, and for everyone who's participated in this portion of it. I think we covered a lot of ground, and I think we unpacked a little bit on sort of where the data opportunity was, perhaps some of the things that dealt with more ecosystem related connectivity to other areas like social determinants of health. We certainly talked about disease types and areas that we might invest in there. I want to take then maybe the next 2 minutes to offer up the stage for anyone who feels that there's maybe an area that we haven't talked about here, where, you know, we talked about access, we talked about patient outcomes, we talked about sustainability of the system. Those are all very laudable and noble aspirations, but when you get right down to it, you know, specificity is going to be important. So let me open up the stage to see if anyone has any other suggestions of fields that we should be thinking about in this next phase. Do I feel like an auctioneer going once, going twice? Do we have any hands up, Ian?
Yep, Reed's got his hand up.
Okay, great. Please.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think a lot of these pieces, and I think I got a chance to kind of discuss at the last session, just regarding kind of overall where the mental health field is going, especially digital.
Thank you for saying that. Yep.
Yeah, I think with these other pieces, looking at that and watching that focus and that shift and seeing these pieces around, especially the fallout after COVID, the financial repercussions that we're about to all experience, because there's some pieces that we still haven't had hit us yet. So there's still some impacts that I look at those fronts. And, you know, like Forbes just released an article the year before regarding like 1.2 billion and change, like, and that's USA and kind of a broad scope in North America, but again, more of a focus on the United States and just overall app-based startups that around digital and mental health resourcing and things like that. And actually, you know, myself and then 2 other business partners are actually working on a project ourselves, and we're very much interested in sourcing some resourcing through you folks if the possibility comes to be. So yeah, but anyways, just my 2 cents on that is just having those kind of focus pieces around those parts, because there's a lot of moving parts that kind of, again, there's a lot of very kind of wokey kind of version of mental health and wellness without really any clinical merits. So when it comes to those pieces and pairing those 2 and balancing those 2 really effectively is going to be a really game-changing piece for that field.
Thanks for that comment, Reed. Certainly mental health, I think, was part of our portfolio before, and I think it's something that we should pay attention to this round as well.
Awesome.
So let's see, other hands. It looks like, Alina, do you have another, is your hand up there?
Yeah, I feel I took up too much space. You just mentioned about specificity and made me realize that we didn't mention the important part around performance management of systems, and that the right sizing of systems, policy directions, and how do we actually bring technology to bear on those decision processes for policy as well. So all this stuff is, you know, 40,000 mental health apps targeting Canadians or whatever the stat is. We're never going to get at the structural pieces if we don't start thinking about how we bring these tools to the decision makers that are also very digitally unsavvy and are not used to using data to make those policy decisions either. It's so inherently political. So that area seems to me very underdeveloped, and it's easier in a way to focus on the client because we have that lived experience, we get it, it's an app, it's easy to sell, but there's also that decision maker too that requires a very, very sophisticated tool set that is made to seem very simple and intuitive at the same time. And that too is an area where health innovation can really make a big impact. So that's all.
Thanks, Helena. You raise a really good point. And I think maybe in our first chapter, we did talk about capacity building within the health fields and all of those that tie to it, because that is a big area of opportunity, possibly deficiency, as you've outlined there. So we'll make sure that we note that there is an opportunity to kind of build digital literacy capacity in the fields, not only mental health, but many of the other areas of health as well. Okay, great discussion. We're at the top of the hour here, and I want to thank everyone for participating in today's conversation. Please keep in mind, this is just the beginning of the conversation, it's not the end. Feel free to kind of reach out to myself at btam@digitalsupercluster.ca or Ian at ievans@digitalsupercluster.ca, and we'd be happy to carry on any sort of additional ideas you might have subsequent to this. As Annika said, we'll share the recording of this with others, And we're going to have a steady drumbeat to building our strategy over the course of the next couple of months. So look forward to working with you through that. And as with everything, you know, we'll continue to shape this and evolve this as we go through the program as well. So this is really an opportunity to kind of do it from the front end, but certainly we'll learn from our practices as we go through the next phase. And we're really excited to be working with you for the next 5 to 10 to 50 years. So have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Bill. We'll see you.